Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Harmony webinar series. My name is Gina Thorne, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Harmony Foundation, and it's my pleasure today to welcome and greet Pasadena Villa's Executive Director, Sally Laws, as our facilitator for this afternoon's workshop. Her workshop title is cleverly labeled Chicken, Egg, or a Chicken Omelet, the Crossroads of Treating PTSD and Addiction. This webinar is being recorded, and if you are, throughout the course of the webinar, interested in asking questions, there is a chat box down at the bottom where we will be accepting questions throughout the webinar today. Just for those of you that are new to Harmony and are not familiar with us, we are nestled on a 43-acre campus in the Rocky Mountains, just outside of Estes Park, Colorado. Our Colorado residential rehab offers comprehensive treatment for adults and their family members. So who is Harmony Foundation? Harmony believes that long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs is possible. We believe that we are a place between two worlds. Our location in the Rockies provides a safe and quiet respite from the pain of addiction. With over 49 years of treating addiction, we have fostered a generation of long-term recovery who supports our clients and families for a lifetime. Harmony staff at all levels of the organization works together to create a community of recovery support that is long-lasting. We are a 70-plus bed residential facility offering a full continuum of care beginning at detox all the way through transitional living. We're located at the base of Rocky Mountain National Park in Estes Park. We offer evidence-based 12-step programming that is gender responsive. And for those of you that are interested in learning more about Harmony, we invite you to visit us at www.harmonyfoundationinc.com, or you can contact one of our admissions staff at 866-686-7867. Just a few housekeeping. For those of you that are seeking CEU credit for today's webinar, it will be available to you after the workshop is over. We will have a survey that will populate to you directly. If you do not get that survey, please reach out to me, or you can reach out to Christy Weeks at cweeks@harmonyfoundationinc.com. We will be pushing out certificates by the end of the week. So if you don't get your certificate, please let us know. Again, we invite you to, through the course of Drew Sally's presentation, if you have any specific questions, feel free to ask. We want to give a special shout out to Pasadena Villa for their willingness to collaborate with us on this webinar. I was just speaking with Sally a moment ago in regards to my deep appreciation for the quality of work that Pasadena Villa does, both in Tennessee and in Florida, and she will share more with you in a minute. There is a link down at the bottom. If you're interested in learning more about Pasadena Villa, please be sure to check them out. They're a really unique program that does some pretty amazing work. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sally Laws. Sally is the Executive Director of the Smoky Mountain Lodge for Pasadena Villa. She has experience working with children, adolescents, adults, and families in a residential treatment setting. She began her career as a primary therapist in adolescent residential treatment and has held roles as clinical director, program director, and assistant administrator. She received her Master of Education in Community Counseling from Delta State University and is also an educational specialist in counselor education and supervision. She has completed parts 1 and 2 of the EMDR basic training and has completed 2 different EMDR advanced practice workshops. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and transition the presentation over to Sally.
Thank you so much, Gina. I appreciate that. I need to update that picture perhaps, but we'll move on from there. If I can, just quickly, I'll speak a little bit about Pasadena Villa and what we do, and then we'll move on to what I hope is the good stuff. So we're actually a network of psychiatric residential treatment programs. So we specialize in treatment of individuals who have clinically complex thought, mood, autism spectrum disorders. Our hallmark is our social integration model, and essentially that boils down to that we have a very open clinical environment where our residents receive ongoing observation and support from psychotherapists. They process and intervene in real time. The goal is to build resiliency and effective intervention. So through this, we take our residents out into the community. They participate in social, cultural, and recreational activities that provide real-life experiences and coaching in real time with our therapists as opposed to simply with support staff. And the whole goal is preparing our residents for life outside of treatment and helping them reach the highest level of individual functioning. We do have 3 different locations. So our founding program is in Orlando, Florida. What I think is the Rockstar flagship program, which is Smoky Mountain Lodge in East Tennessee. And then our most recent addition is an outpatient practice with IOP and PHP with housing in Raleigh. And here in Tennessee, we just became in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield. We are primarily private pay, do some work with out-of-network insurance, but now are able to do that. So, and I'll share my contact information if anybody has any more information about that. Okay, I had to do that, or my BD director wouldn't let me play in public anymore. So I appreciate your patience with that. So a little bit of a background would be that I became kind of the trauma girl by survival. My first job was adolescent residential addiction treatment, and I had a caseload of 7, and 6 of them were very open about their trauma history. The 7th one I had it ruled out. And so I had to get up to speed on dealing with trauma and dealing with addiction pretty quickly, and was fortunate to have had multiple opportunities throughout my career to continue that, and found that it's really my passion. One of the challenges is that much like I think we're getting better in mental health care, but anybody that's old like I am can remember the old days of, oh, you can't go to addiction treatment because you have a psychiatric disorder, but you can't go to psychiatric treatment because you have an addiction disorder. And I found the same thing has come up with PTSD, and that's both from clients and from other folks. So a lot of people want to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how did it start. So I've certainly treated plenty of people who are certain that addiction is not an issue because they just use to cope with their PTSD. You know, I just have to drink a 5th of vodka a night so I can sleep and not have nightmares. But on the flip side, a lot of the folks I treated ended up with traumatic experiences as a result of living a life in active addiction. And so what I will submit to you is that rather than investing all of our energy into figuring out where it started, that our best bet is really to just deal with the omelet and help people with both in a combined method. And then later we can worry about how did it happen. So it's funny, I was just talking to some of my employees that, you know, if any of you have ever had the joy of having a small child spill chocolate milk in the back seat of your car, I can tell you from experience that spending a lot of energy figuring out how the chocolate milk got spilled while it is soaking into the upholstery is not going to serve you well come July in the deep south. You will every summer after that, every hot day, get the joy of reliving that day. So my suggestion is that we first clean up the milk, and then later we can figure out, do we need to not have chocolate milk in the car? Do we need to get sippy cups? What do we need to do to prevent it in the future? And you know, please bear with me. I know that, you know, y'all all know a lot of this stuff. My hope is that we're going to put some things together and you may relearn something, may have an aha, but either way you will get your continuing education, and we all know that's the goal. So, you know, what is PTSD? And as I like to explain it to folks, it's essentially, you know, a bad ongoing experience in relation to doo-doo occurring in life. And everybody has doo-doo, and so I would also submit that when it comes to treatment, maybe we need to worry less about does it meet the diagnostic criteria for the disorder, but instead deal with everybody has some kind of trauma, and the issue is if you're continuing to have reactions that don't work for you, then let's address that in treatment. So I had to put the fancy technical stuff in here, and I know y'all know this, that it's starts with exposure to an extreme stressor, and that's really where I get to that I'm going to treat trauma regardless of if it meets PTSD, because it may not meet the definition of an extreme stressor for any individual, but if it is creating all of this reaction in somebody, then it still needs to get treated. If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, has webbed feet, and quacks, I figure it's waterfowl, whether it's a duck or not. And so, you know all of those symptoms, right? That I'm going to re-experience it while also trying to avoid it. It's going to affect me mentally, emotionally. I'm going to have that physical reactivity. And most importantly, my pop quiz with my folks a lot of times is this last one, which is the single criterion that occurs in every single disorder for it to qualify as a disorder, which is also how I justify that I do not have caffeine use disorder, because it has to create that impairment in important areas of life. So on the flip side, what is addiction? Again, you know that. I like the nutshell version that it's continuing to use even though doo-doo occurs as a result of my using. And in that case, it's, whether it's buying paper clips or I may or may not have a little bit of a news addiction. I had been clean and now I'm staying up too late at night watching CNN and reading articles on CNN.com. And, then I'm too tired and I promise myself just one more article, and then bless your hearts, you're listening to me on 3 hours of sleep because there was lots of news last night. So, I'm continuing to use the news despite the fact that it kind of causes me some problems in life. All right, so then, all the technical stuff, right? That you're using more than you meant to, you're wanting to stop or slow down, but you're not able to. It takes more and more to get the same effect. It's really serious when you have to both watch CNN and read articles at the same time. I mean, that is tolerance right there. Cravings and urges. I'm going to try to not read the news while I'm presenting to you today. And failing to meet those important obligations. And again, the fancy technical terminology for what I said in the first place, which is continuing to use despite negative consequences. So, I want to first break down what does this PTSD thing look like. And we've got these different symptoms: the re-experiencing, the avoidance, numbing, the increased arousal, the problems. I went too far. Sorry about that. So first of all, that re-experiencing, it comes up in 1,000 different ways. It may be the nightmares. It may be flashbacks. And I got to tell you, man, when I got out of school, I as we established, I'm old. So there were a whole lot of Vietnam era movies out about the Vietnam War and such when I was in college, and I really thought that a flashback was all of a sudden the guy who was in Vietnam walking through the mall suddenly thinking that he was in the jungle and the Viet Cong were everywhere. As I have grown a little bit and learned a little bit more, I realized that may not be what the flashback looks like. It may much more be having that sensation. And we'll get into this a little bit more as we talk about the different ways that some of these things manifest, but it may also be perceiving different situations through that lens in terms of the re-experiencing. So if, as a kid, my brother beat me up and my parents then told me that if I wasn't a brat, I wouldn't get beaten up. Now as an adult, I've got a coworker who is really, being difficult, kind of sabotaging me, really being inappropriate, and I am approaching it from the assumption that my boss is going to tell me that I'm the problem, so I don't do anything to resolve it. That would be a re-experiencing. Obviously, that avoidance and that numbing, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not going to look at it. It's not an issue. Don't tell me about it. I'm going to avoid. My kid got bitten by a shark, so now we can't ever go to the beach. And in fact, I can't watch movies that are set at the beach. Those kinds of things. And of course, addiction ties really nicely into helping with that numbing and that avoidance. I had to have a colonoscopy several years ago, and you could tell that I worked in addiction treatment. All of my colleagues kept telling me that I would get, quote, good drugs. But before the colonoscopy, they shot Versed into my IV, and I was conscious just long enough to say, that's why they shoot up. Because in that moment, it was perfectly okay with me that they were about to put a camera in a not so nice place because everything was right in the world. And then the other place, that it may look like is that increased arousal, that fight or flight. And at that point, the limbic system is in charge, the prefrontal cortex isn't engaged, and nobody makes great long-term decisions. So if I'm walking through life, always on alert, always looking to protect myself, it's kind of hard to do anything else. And then, of course, those problems at home, work, school, it's a lot of time, I will say, as having been a wife, we're real picky when we get cussed out, called everything. I'm Southern, as I'm sure you've already figured out. So a Southern phrase is called everything but a child of God, and mistreated because I just did something that reminded you of your traumatic experience. So obviously, what does addiction look like? Well, I think there are a lot of similarities. So if we think about with PTSD, that's re-experiencing. In addiction, there is this phenomenon that is completely amazing, which is euphoric recall. And if you've never seen it, it is truly amazing. And I've watched it happen a couple of times. Particularly, IV users will have such a reaction to just the idea of using it. There'll be a lot of IV users who may actually shoot up ice water because they will get enough of a rush. And I would talk to folks that they would already start feeling high on the way to the dope man's house. I had a guy who was doing great in treatment. We're sitting in group ends about noon, and at 11:55, he breaks out in a sweat, and he is shaking, and all of a sudden he says, I just realized it's Friday. It's noon. I get my paycheck on Friday at noon. Normally I would be clocking out for lunch and hitting the crack house and broke by the end of the day. And he looked high, he was manic, all of that. I promise he didn't use in group. I rarely would promise that I know somebody didn't use, but I know he did not use in the 3 hours we were sitting there in group. But he had all of that. And then, the avoidance. I don't want to deal with that this might be a problem. Years ago, I actually had a friend who was in recovery, and he was talking about an upcoming AA picnic, actually, and his sponsor was responsible for bringing the potato salad. And my friend was like, are you kidding me? How can you eat that? Oh, my God, I think I'm allergic to potato salad. This guy's been sober for 3 years. Finally, as they talked, he was able to connect that perhaps he was not allergic to potato salad, but perhaps it was because the vodka he had drank before consuming the potato salad, but that ongoing avoidance of anything that's going to make me face what is a painful reality. And again, problems at home, work, and school. Again, we wives can be really picky when you pass out in the living room and forget to pick the baby up from daycare, as an example. So another commonality that these two lovely experiences share is that they're not real picky. In general, who may have PTSD? Obviously, adult survivors of childhood abuse. Most prominently, a lot of times, we think about our service members who have been in combat zones, rape survivors, survivors of violent crimes, severe car wrecks. I actually spent a bit of time treating attorneys, and it's amazing how many of them can have some PTSD related to some of the cases that they work on. But in general, it's not picky. There's not one race that's more at risk, not an age, not a religion, not a nationality, not a sexual orientation. The caveat there is in terms of not your biology, but your environment. So obviously, if you are living in a combat zone, yes, all of the people living in the combat zone are more likely to end up with some PTSD, but it's not because of their ethnicity, it's because they're being exposed to extreme stressors day in and day out. All right, well, who has addiction? Man, this was one of the big questions that both just about every client I ever treated and every family of every client wanted to know is, why did this happen? How did this happen? And tragically, most people don't really like the true answer, which is, we don't really know. But we don't really know about most diseases. Certainly we know that if you have a family history of addiction, you're more likely. We know that individuals who begin using substances at younger ages are more likely to develop addiction later. Some of that's going to be about the brain still developing and getting pathways carved in earlier. Folks with chronic pain. Now, I was at something not too long ago, and everybody in the room seemed to be talking as if the opioid epidemic is strictly related to all these people with chronic pain who got prescribed opiates and now are addicts. And I treated some of those people, but I got to tell you, most of the people I treated, A, when they got clean, they found out that their pain wasn't quite as bad as it had been before because they weren't having withdrawal pain, and B, had been using all kinds of things otherwise, but also trauma survivors. Again, a lot of people may find their way to starting with some substances that are the solution, that it helps me sleep, I don't dream, I can relax, any of those things. And then down the line, it gets out of control. And like our friend PTSD, addiction isn't picky either. So there are certainly some different demographics that are more likely, but at the end of the day, name a demographic and there's somebody there with that disorder. All right. So really, when I first started talking about this, why treating PTSD was often something that I more had to explain to those suffering with trauma than to anybody else. But the reality is that PTSD is really expensive. It absolutely destroys relationships. It absolutely is devastating in the workforce when there is someone who is a great employee, an incredible member of our workforce who becomes unable to function at work as a result of untreated PTSD. It takes a tremendous physical toll, a tremendous personal drag, and at the end of the day, it ends up costing taxpayers, because when someone ends up to the point that they're completely unable to work and they are having to rely on disability and things like that, we're all paying for that. And don't get me wrong, I am happy to contribute to help pay for people who truly can't do it for themselves. What breaks my heart with PTSD is that it is treatable and that people can get better and can get back to a place of being independent, functioning members of society. And then I think, in terms of happiness, we all need a reason to put on pants. I'm a huge fan of the occasional jammy day. That's where you decide that you're going to take a Saturday off and you're going to stay in your pajamas all day and watch movies and eat junk food. But when that becomes a lifetime, that takes an emotional toll on most people. Look at that. All the same reasons that we should treat addiction. And as Gina was talking about when she talked about harmony, it is absolutely treatable, and recovery absolutely can be sustained. And it is amazing to me. For years, I told people that I got paid money to watch people grow. But in addiction, relationships get destroyed, careers get lost. And, as having moved into the administration side of things, which basically means I do spreadsheets and boss people around, I know I would always rather salvage an employee, because it's going to be financially costly, but also a tremendous drain on my human resources to have to start all over with recruiting and hiring and training. Again, there's that same physical health issue, the personal, emotional health, and yes, we're all paying for it. By the time someone gets to a place that they can't take care of themselves, as good citizens of the world, we pitch in to help. And or, because we've decided to criminalize a lot of it, we take care of them in overcrowded jails. So either way, it's costing us all in a way that it doesn't have to if we can effectively treat it. All right, so this would be a pop quiz. I understand that everybody gets an A, because I'm just going to assume that you're going to get this right. But which of these two disorders is going to do this in terms of impacting the physical health of an individual? Create injuries, create changes in pain threshold, and create stress-related health problems? Oops. Yes, that's right. You all got an A. Congratulations. They both do. Obviously, people have been known. I may or may not have, once upon a time in college, had an adult beverage or two and fallen down and skinned my knee. That's not the worst thing in the world that can happen. But there are lots of other cases of someone having an adult beverage or 200 and getting behind the wheel of a car. The other thing is that they both can alter the pain threshold, and that's where the individual recognizes pain. And while no one likes pain, pain really does serve a purpose. The old joke, hey, doc, it hurts when I do this. Well, don't do that. If you don't feel the hurt, you may keep doing it. So obviously, if you're under the influence of substances, nothing hurts. But the same thing actually can happen with someone with a trauma history, depending on the kind of trauma. We know that individuals, particularly who were physically abused as children, one of the ways they survive that is to not recognize the pain. And so then you take that fast forward, and as an adult, what started out maybe as a minor shoulder injury ends up requiring a full shoulder joint replacement because I didn't recognize that it hurt until the damage was far more severe than it needed to be. And then both of them are going to create some stress-related health problems because guess what? When your life is falling apart and you're having problems at work and in your relationships and you're emotionally miserable, that's really, really stressful. So if I am suffering from PTSD and I'm walking around in that hypervigilant state and I am clenching my jaw and my shoulders are up around my ears, guess what? That's going to create some pain for me. I joke with my staff about trying to give me a stroke at work at times, but absolutely it's my responsibility to manage the stressors. But if I was trying to do my job and manage a heroin addiction and deal with my untreated PTSD, chances are I'd be a lot more likely to stroke out at work. For the record, because, Pasadena Villa will not be happy if this gets confused, I am not juggling a heroin addiction at work currently, or ever, actually. So they both can do those things. All right, so what about mentally? And one of the things that has amazed me, as Gina mentioned, my last degree, it's actually a consolation degree. So I do appreciate, Gina, that you started to call me doctor. It started to be a PhD, but if you don't do a dissertation and you stay in school long enough, they eventually say, here, you can have an educational specialist degree. So Dr. Laws is my mom. But it amazed me in working in counselor education and doing clinical supervision for young therapists that it's not just my clients that struggled to differentiate mental versus emotional, but even we do. And so when I'm talking about mentally, I'm really talking about that thought process. And so the first way that both of these disorders, spoiler alert, impact information processing. So every experience is information, it's data. And there are basically two ways to process information. The first way is the healthiest and most effective way, which is that as I get new information, I apply that new information and I change what I already knew based on this new information. So if everyone can think way back to third grade, and you knew as a hard, solid fact, no matter what, that subtraction meant that you took the little number from the big number. That was the information you had. And then fast forward maybe seventh grade. I'm a product of public school in the South, so it may have been second grade for the rest of you, but in general, wherever, all of a sudden you start getting taught about this concept of negative numbers, where you're subtracting the big number from the little number. Well, if you made it out of seventh grade, you were able to adjust the information that you had that said subtraction means little number from big number to make sense of it, taking in this new information. And if you didn't, at some point you got a bank account and the bank was really helpful in helping you understand the concept of negative numbers. So that's the healthiest way. Now, that said, sometimes we can take that too far and we can over change our current information based on new information. So, for example, if I decide that I win the lottery and I've got a handful, like a wad, like 2 handfuls of $100 bills. And I decide that I think it would be really, really cool for me to head to LA, and I'm going to walk through East LA or south side of Chicago at 2 a.m. unarmed, with my money out. It is in the realm of possibility that something negative could happen as a result of that. So the most effective information processing would be for me to decide, wow, based on this new information of my having just been robbed, it's not safe to walk around at 2 a.m. alone, unarmed, in a high crime neighborhood with wads of cash in my hand. But if I instead globalize that new information, what may happen is that then I decide that I can never be safe, that the world is dangerous, and that becomes really challenging to live with. The other way that we can process information that is never terribly helpful is that we will adjust the new information to fit with what we already know. So let's suppose that I'm a small child and I am completely dependent on adults to take care of me. And what I know is that adults have my best interest at heart, that they will never hurt me, that they love me, and that if something hurts, that they're doing it for my own good. Now let's suppose that I am also being abused by an adult, but I'm completely dependent on adults. So to survive, I've got to figure out how to make sense of those two. And what often happens is I change this new information that says an adult is hurting me to fit with what I already know. So now I decide that this is what love looks like, that I'm bad, I deserve this, and so then I've just changed this new information. Instead of being able to say, this person is hurtful, I decide that I deserve to be hurt, and that's going to impact a whole lot of things going forward. So when we get to talking about these negative beliefs about the self, right, it's really about this prism that an individual is walking through life with. So if I have ineffectively processed information, all of my experiences, I may be walking around with beliefs about myself that just aren't terribly helpful, that I am unlovable, that I am bad. I once was working with a combat vet, and as we started working through this, his negative belief about himself, when we got down to the core of it, was, I'm a monster. And that's heartbreaking. This guy was the sweetest guy you could ever imagine. But that was his view of himself. And that absolutely impacted his interactions with other people. Because now I'm going to make decisions based on these beliefs that I have about myself. So I'm going to choose to continue to get in relationships with people who aren't trustworthy because I've decided that no one is trustworthy. I've decided that love looks like getting hurt, so I ignore signals that I'm about to get hurt because I figure that's just what has to happen. And similarly with those negative beliefs about the world, right, that the world is evil, no one can be trusted, I can never be safe, those same kinds of things. And if you can think about all the different decisions that we make every day, that would be different if we were approaching those decisions through a skewed prism, which is not a great analogy, but we're going to go with it. All right, so which disorder is going to impact you spiritually? And having grown up in the world of 12-step treatment, as I'm sure many of you work in that world as well, spirituality is not religion. My favorite way to define spirituality is that it is really about a recognition of my role in the universe and my connectedness, whatever I'm connected to. And so, again, you all get an A. Both disorders impact us spiritually. They both create shame. My favorite definition of powerlessness in terms of the first step of 12-step fellowships is that I did the things I said I would never do, and I became the person I said I would never be. And that is inherently very shaming, that who I am is just terrible. Well, again, if the way I process the information of my negative experiences is to decide that I'm a monster, that I'm garbage, then that's a whole lot of shame that I'm carrying around. Both can end up in a place of hopelessness where truly, truly insane things seem like perfectly good ideas. That person who has been up for 3 nights or 5 nights with nightmares, and has lost their job because they showed up to work drunk, that place of hopelessness and that nothing can get better, that's where the idea of just checking out comes in. And then the loss of faith. And again, I'm not talking about loss of faith in any particular religion, but just loss of faith that I'm going to get through it. I'm going to be okay. That this too will pass, or any of those things. All right, last pop quiz. Which disorder creates that? That's right, you all made straight A's. I'm very proud of you. I hope you're proud of yourselves. I have a pink pen. I don't have a red pen, but I have a pink pen, and I'll be happy to send you all your A's with my fancy little alphabet soup after it. Yes, they all create these emotions and impact it. And again, as I always told people, the goal of addiction was to not feel. So the goal of recovery can't be to not feel. As whole human beings, we're ideally experiencing the full range of emotions. But there's a difference in, I got angry because the sixth day in a row, I had to ask the staff about an issue with a report that they do that comes out wrong every day, versus I'm angry all day, every day. Sadness is manageable, depression is not. Nerves, a little anxiety is manageable, terror is not. Little guilt is manageable, but that place of shame is not. And absolutely some embarrassment. So, 1, 2, 3, right? If we go to that 12-step place. And this is one of the reasons that I think that it is crucial to address PTSD trauma in the context of addiction treatment, because the things that we ask people to do in addiction treatment become nearly impossible if we don't address their PTSD. So the first one is recognizing that I'm not in control, and that my out of controlness and my continuing to do things is creating a lot of doo-doo in my life. But the next one is that place of having faith that I can get better, having faith that there is an end to this tunnel, even though I can't even see the light yet. And then step 3 is really about, I'm going to put my trust in something and I'm going to give it a shot. I think it can work, but I'll give it a shot. So here's the problem with someone who is suffering from active PTSD when we ask them to do that. We ask them to let go of control. But for many people who have survived traumatic events, one of the beliefs that they may have come to terms with is the only way I'm going to be okay is if I make me okay. If I grew up in an abusive home and adults didn't meet my needs, then probably early on I figured out that my needs will get met if I meet them. And so suddenly you're asking me to accept that I'm not in charge and I can't do that. That's not a great plan. And so with that, now you're asking me to have faith that something out there that you can't point to me and say, this is it, can do what I haven't been able to do. And then third, you're asking me to give up my self-reliance. We might as well bring people into treatment who are suffering from PTSD and tell them, you know what, we have just figured out that you are actually a fish, not a mammal. You have gills, not lungs. And the reason that you're struggling so is that you keep trying to breathe air, but what you actually need to breathe is water. So what we need you to do, this is the only way you're going to get better, by the way, is to stick your head in this giant vat of water and just inhale deeply. And I know it's a little scary, but I promise it's going to be okay. That's essentially what we ask people to do if we don't address the underlying trauma that has shaped what they're doing. And one of the things I always tell people in my work with them with trauma is, rule number 1 is whatever it took to survive is okay. And the first thing to do is to acknowledge that you survived. And those things may not be working for you anymore, but you survived, and we're not going to waste time judging your younger self based on the self that has this different experience, because you survived it. Now we can go clean it up, but you had to survive it to get to the point of treating it. So we go back to that catch-22, right? Oh, well, God, I can't touch your trauma if you're actively using. Oh, wait, but you're not going to stay sober unless we address your trauma. And let me be clear. I am not suggesting that it is a good idea to open up someone's trauma while they're in the middle of using and then send them home and hope they don't overdose. I'm also not suggesting that when someone shows up at I have a lot of different roles within the same company of addiction treatment, and we actually had some contracts with hospitals to manage medical detox units. I promise you I was not opening up their trauma in the 5-day medical detox, but they both have to be treated at some point in order for those individuals to really get better and, more importantly, stay better. And at the end of the day, that's, I know that we're all in the same, have the same goal, which is to ultimately work ourselves out of the job. And tomorrow, if nobody else is suffering, I will be the happiest person in the unemployment line. So, again, it's both. And we've got to look at how they overlap, how they impact each other, and address them together and in concert. So I'm going to take you through a model for treating PTSD in a group setting within the context of addiction treatment. And it borrows some concepts both from EMDR and from some information processing, and both are strategies that are validated and approved by the DOD and the VA. And I know that we all feel better if the government says it's good. So my first thing is I strongly believe that it needs to be gender specific. And my reason for that is not what often people think, which is that, oh, if I'm a woman and I was raped, I won't feel safe with men. It's really about how we're socialized differently. And I say this as the woman who was likely the best move I ever had the flu, because I was willing to let all the guys that were there to help me do it, because normally, by golly, if there's a piano to move, I will get the piano and I will let the giant muscular man carry the sheet music because I can do anything he can do. And then I gave birth to a son. And I began to recognize just how differently we truly are socialized and some things. So one of the things that I have found is that in general, let me back up that I know these are in general, but in general, men are often socialized to protect women. And so one of the challenges for me in trying to do a trauma group that is co-ed is that all of my guys wouldn't do their work because they would be so busy trying to take care of all of the women. And as I said, I gave birth to a son, and when he was 7 years old, my dad died. And I did a lot of things wrong as a parent, and I have a whole long list of other wrong things to do still. But one of the things I know I didn't do was I know that I did not teach him that it was his job to take care of me. That I was very clear that adults take care of children, children don't take care of adults. And yet, at the funeral, my sister and I might have both had an emotion or two about our father's death. And I watched this 7-year-old boy struggle with figuring out who he should take care of and who he needed to comfort most and more and when. So somewhere in there, biology, environment, I don't know, but I know that is a factor that can come up. Obviously, there is the other piece that it can trigger trauma issues. And then last, that gender-specific allows that ability to identify with peers. I will tell you, and again, very general, in my experience, and I facilitated both a women's trauma group and a men's trauma group. With the women, one of the things that we had to work on is that, your trauma really isn't bigger and badder and more severe than everybody else's. And no, you don't have to introduce yourself by vomiting it all out. There are certainly exceptions to that. But the flip side was with men, more often than not, I had to help them get to a place that, you know what, I'm not going to put down my trauma. It's okay. It's sufficient. And I can talk about it. So all of those things. And then really not even so much, like I said, with the whole idea of women who have been sexually assaulted by a male. But one of the things I found, too, is that men were much more comfortable and able to talk about having been victims with just men around. And that was a lot more uncomfortable for them with women in the room. and they were less likely to do it. So group process. I cannot tell you how many trauma groups I did where the very first moment of the first day, I've got people, in near panic attack. And what I would always say to them is, you don't have to go there right now. It's actually not healthy. We've just met. It is not healthy for you to come in here and vomit all of this really painful stuff up. So we're going to build to it. And that's going to start with some trust building. So I always start with a completely non-threatening kind of icebreaker, like if your life had a soundtrack, what would the main song be and why? If you were a car, what kind of car would you be? Whatever. Totally mundane, totally just, hey, this is who I am. The other thing is that we would work together to create some group rules. And I had my set ones. So in addiction treatment, one of them was, you really are still going to a meeting tonight if you're at the place where you're going to outside meetings. Do not dare go say that Sally said I don't have to go tonight because I was in trauma group, because actually Sally's going to say you best go. You best be talking to your sponsor every day. And then we offered yoga, and so one of my other rules was that I needed them to go to yoga twice a week. But then we worked through their other rules. Obviously, confidentiality was always one. The last one that I required was that we don't judge anyone's trauma. And I very specifically said anyone, not anyone else's. I've never yet had a group, and I'm talking I did groups with active duty special forces guys, and then in that same group there would be a guy who was emotionally abused. I never had the hardcore Navy SEAL look at the guy whose dad told him he was a rotten piece of garbage every day of his life and say, your trauma's not real. What I did have was individual after individual would start to hear someone else's story and then decide mine isn't big enough, it doesn't matter. The other thing that inevitably has to be done is in the world of residential treatment, these people live together. They're with each other all the time. And so we had to start with, let's put out any conflicts that exist in this group right now. And if we can't get through it, and at the end of this conversation, you don't both feel that you can be safe and trust to do the work that you need to do, then we'll figure it out. Maybe one of you will do our next round because it's a close, but we're going to get there. And almost always I had people willing to work through it, and almost always on the other side of this group, they were the tightest. So one quick example, I had a guy who had hung his pier over the edge of a balcony by his feet because the pier had stolen his Funyuns. We talked through it, and as they went through the group, one of the things they found out is the Funyun thief grew up in a really large family where nobody had my stuff. It was all our stuff. So it just didn't occur to him that they were, personal Funyuns. They were Funyuns. But the guy whose Funyuns were stolen grew up in a really poor family and didn't have a lot of treats like Funyuns and had to scrap for everything. And so for him, it was really about, you violated me. I'm not going to have enough food, even though intellectually he knew that we were feeding him. But that's what it went to, and they ended up being great buddies. So the next thing is creating that safety and setting those expectations. One of my other pieces of creating safety is leave no man behind. So everybody's going to agree to take a stab at all of the work. And if you think about it, 3-year-olds have figured this out. I promise no one on the planet has ever opened up a closet door and found one 3-year-old completely naked and the other 3-year-old in a parka. 3-year-olds to figure out the way this works is I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And so part of what has to happen for safety is everybody has to be willing to give it a shot. And then I did a safe place exercise. I would do a guided imagery, and I will tell you that to this day, the single best predictor of whether or not somebody was going to be willing to do the work was how they did on this. Because at the end of the guided imagery, I'd have them sit down, and I had this big box of crayons and markers and colored pencils and a big stack of paper. And the people that got down and colored did the work. And the person who took his or her, and it happened both ways, Bic pen, and drew in one corner of a giant sheet of white paper, inevitably didn't put a lot of effort into the rest of the assignments. So, it's all about creating those shared experiences. And we're going to look at the past. But again, one of the things that I always point out to people is that if it's truly not bothering you, if it's not an issue, then you're right. Let's not deal with it. We're dealing with it because it's impacting how you are now and how you function now. And it's keeping you from having the life you can have right now. And if we don't change that course, then you're continuing on a path that means it's going to impact your future. So, part of it is we're going to look at addressing the minimizing. And one of the things, and this is a stolen concept from EMDR, it's not a Sally original, but the idea of a little T and a big T. And everybody has little T trauma, that's, I'm going to share with everybody a Sally little T trauma. I was actually painfully shy as a kid, and I wet my pants in first grade in class because I was too shy to ask if I could go to the bathroom. That's a little T trauma, right? It was not an extreme stressor, but I'm pretty old to remember any given day in first grade, and I remember that day. And one of the things that I would tell people is if I've got one boulder, that's my one big T trauma. And Gina has a boulder-sized sack of pea gravel. The reality is those are both weighing us down the same amount. So it really doesn't matter whose is bigger because they're both killing us. And then we're going to do some exercises to help suss out what are those key negative beliefs that those individuals are carrying through life making decisions on. We're going to look at how distressing are these memories and where does it show up in their body, and also how does it impact them spiritually. Ideally, we're going to get to looking at a future blueprint, which is what are the beliefs you want to have. Let's visualize success. So again, I treated a lot of combat vets, and in our program at the time, they carpooled to 12-step meetings in the evenings. And in our current wars, convoys are an incredibly dangerous time. Traffic is incredibly frightening for them, and particularly being not in control, not driving, in the middle of the back seat. And so walking through, okay, what are you going to do? Let's see you being successful at being in the back seat, in the middle of the back seat, and getting to the meeting, not in a panic attack. And then identifying those ongoing resources. What are you going to call on? What are you going to use? The other thing is closure, and that's both daily and final. So that daily closure is, again, I'm not going to rip open your gut, having them exposed, and then send you on your merry way and say, good luck, hope that doesn't go bad for you. So I have a variety of relaxation exercises, guided imagery, progressive muscle. I had one guy that he hated all of that stuff, but he loved Gregorian chants. So I downloaded a whole bunch of Gregorian chants on my iPhone and played chants for him. But then the other thing is a final ritual. And so my favorite one, I had a couple of different ones, but my favorite one was early on when we're identifying those negative beliefs, I'd had them write them on little tiny slivers of paper. And at the end, I'd have a helium tank. You can get them at Walmart for like $10. Word to the wise, don't let the drug addicts play with the helium tank. But I'd give everybody a balloon, and they would roll up those little tiny pieces of paper with those negative beliefs, the things that they wanted to release, and put them in a balloon. We'd blow them up, go outside, and release them. A lot of people visualize a higher power as being up. Maybe it's release it to the universe. I also figured it was job security because somewhere in the world, some little kid is going out in the yard and going, oh, a balloon, and then they're opening it up and it tells them that they're garbage monsters. For those of you that are bothered by that, not environmentally friendly, the other thing that I did is I got a giant thing of racquetballs from like Costco, and they were their resiliency. They're bounce back balls. And so each person would write with Sharpie on the ball, on one person's ball, something they wanted that person to take with them from the group, and everybody would write on everybody else's ball, and they could take that with them. So some way to kind of close it up. One of the things that I think is important is to prepare people that no matter how amazing a group is, no matter how hard you work, no one closed group is going to magically make it all go away. My goal is I'm going to get you bought into doing the work. I'm going to get you enough relief that you're motivated to keep doing the work, and I'm going to make sure that you've got a plan going forward. So I'm not in school anymore, and I don't make myself crazy by trying to make sure that I hit the APA style, but I did pull some information from the DSM. So if anybody has questions, I promised that I would wrap up at this time, so I'm feeling pretty proud of myself for getting there.
So thank you, Sally, so much. The information has been wonderful, and your enthusiasm behind your presentation is just infectious, and so I really appreciate you taking the time today to present. I don't see any at this point, unless folks are taking a couple of minutes to write in their questions. I wanted to just comment on something that you mentioned, and that's the idea of when to start working on trauma. And there's always been these two schools of thought around trauma being something that you really, unless you can actually do the work while they're in residential and you've got the time to do it, there are some people that believe that holding off until they can get into a period of time with an actual therapist who can focus on the trauma in a realistic time frame makes more sense than starting it when they come into residential treatment. So I appreciated your comments in and around that, because there are a lot of schools of thought related to when do you start working on the trauma.
No, absolutely. And I do think that it's like many things, it can't be a one-size-fits-all. So, I think some of it's about how long are they able and willing to be in residential treatment. And I've had the luxury of working with lots of different lengths of stay. So when I was working in a primary treatment program, largely relying on third-party payers, our average length of stay was 2 to 3 weeks. I wasn't opening up somebody's trauma. On the other hand, if they were in a longer-term program and able to commit to being there, say 6 to 12 weeks, then we could start touching it. And again, being very selective in what are we going to do with it, and making sure that there's that ongoing plan. And everybody knows that, right? Treatment's never, wherever you are in treatment, your discharge plan isn't, okay, bye-bye, go, you don't need anything else. So.
Right. Good point. Rochelle mentions that Gabor Mate claims that all addiction is rooted in trauma. Do you agree and think all clients need trauma and work within substance use treatment centers?
Wow, that's a dangerous question. And my answer is probably not going to thrill you. My answer is yes and no. I do believe that there is a biological component to addiction, that we know that there are some brain issues that go there. I certainly know also, though, that traumatic experiences actually impact brain structure and brain functioning. So certainly someone with that extreme traumatic stressor background is at a higher risk. Here's what I will say, is that I absolutely think that everybody that I ever saw in addiction treatment had trauma that needed to be addressed. And here's what I would say, is that if I take away meeting the criteria for the disorder, but if I really look at, was it traumatic to me? And is it shaping how I am making decisions? Then absolutely everybody does. And one of my favorite, I think this is a story my grandmother told me, so it's probably made up and not true, but apparently, allegedly, there is this old phrase, be quiet, big ears are listening, which basically meant watch out, the kids can hear us, so we shouldn't talk about this in front of them. But there was this kid who kept, every time he turned around, his dad was saying, be careful, big ears are listening. And so he grew up with this false belief that his ears were like enormous, like Prince Charles had smaller ears than he did. Dumbo had nothing on him, and he wore his hair different, and he wouldn't take pictures. And while that's not an extreme traumatic stressor, he was making everyday decisions based on this faulty belief. So I absolutely think that there is a treatment needed for whatever that trauma is. I don't know that everybody qualifies for having the diagnosis of PTSD, and I don't know enough to say that I think that one causes the other as much as they end up getting all mixed up like jazz.
Thank you so much, and hopefully that helps Rochelle in your question. I don't see anybody else typing in anything at the moment. Oh, she said thank you. So, so again, on behalf of Harmony Foundation and Pasadenaville, I want to thank everyone for taking the time in being involved and for participating. I do want to thank you, Sally, for taking the time today and being a part. Again, this webinar is recorded and it will be available to those that would like to have access to it later, and certificates will be mailed out by the end of the week. Again, thanks everyone for participating, and we hope you have a great week. Please join us next month where we are going to have the Refuge presenting on trauma and recovery. So thanks so much. Everyone have a great day.